What makes Deathwatch unique among the Space Marine chapters is that they serve the Ordo Xenos of the Imperial Inquisition as its Chamber Militant. This particularly interesting lore element on its own may have lured more than one of us into picking Deathwatch as their main army. It certainly intrigued me greatly. But what if we actually wanted to bring the Inquisition to the table alongside our Deathwatch? Or some of their other tools? Based on popular demand, we are going to take a closer look at some of the agents of the Imperium available to a Deathwatch army, namely Assassins and Inquisitors. Over the course of the video, we will go over the relevant rules, dive into the datasheets, and attempt to find out how to make best use of them in the Deathwatch. Ready to uncover all the Inquisition secrets?
By order of the Inquisition, stop immediately or face summary execution.
Wait, Greyfax, this is not what you think it is. No!
Welcome to SwissHammer, your channel for modeling in Warhammer 40k. My name is Tammer, and I will be guiding you through this video.
First of all, how do we bring Inquisitors or Assassins along anyway? This is tied to the Agent of the Imperium keyword and ability, which all Inquisitors and Assassins have, and it allows a single one to be included in a patrol, battalion or brigade detachment. They don't use up slots in that detachment, and they don't break any army benefits, for instance combat doctrines. The downside of this is that you will have to make a choice between Inquisitor and Assassin for a single detachment. Speaking of downsides, let's get this one out of the way while we are at it. It is not possible to include agents of the Imperium into an army of renown, as has been clarified in the Warzone Charadon Act 2 Book of Fire FAQ. This of course means that we cannot get them for our army of renown, the Kill Team Strike Force, which is currently the most competitive way to play Deathwatch. Having said that, assuming you are playing a regular Deathwatch list and want to include them there, what are the options available to us? Starting with the Assassins, it looks as following. Aside from the single agents of the Imperium entry we just covered, there is also the option to include multiple assassins through the use of the so-called execution force. What this does is basically hijacking a Vanguard Detachment. You still pay 3 CP, but you don't have to take HQs. That detachment's command benefits are changed to none, and its restrictions are changed to not including the same datasheet more than once. Through this, you can then include one of each assassin. But as we will see in just a moment when going through the datasheets, while assassins can be a useful addition to a Deathwatch army, it is not worth bringing multiple of them along through such a detachment. Therefore, as a rule of thumb, if you want to include an assassin into the Deathwatch, bring a single one through agents of the Imperium and make sure that the overall benefit for your army outweighs the loss of the army of renown, aka you wanted units outside of kill teams anyway. So now that we have decided in favor of including a single assassin, which out of the 4 do we pick? Fortunately, there is a stratagem that makes this choice a little easier. For 2 CP, Shadow Assignment allows swapping out an assassin for another prior to the battle. Therefore, because they all cost 100 points flat, we can include whichever we think is going to be the most useful overall, and then swap if needed. As your default assassin, I recommend the Calidus Assassin, which is basically a shapeshifter trained at deception. This is also reflected in her rules, which we will see in just a moment. Looking at her datasheet, we have a close combat oriented profile that is somewhat comparable to that of a firstborn Space Marine captain, though she has the extra point of movement and 5 attacks already built in. Her loadout is alright, and while the Phase Sword might look particularly intriguing at first glance thanks to ignoring invuls, the Strength 4 really hurts the moment she goes for tougher targets. For abilities, all assassins share the following 4 by default. Agent of the Imperium and Execution Force are the two we previously talked about, which handle how they can be included in the first place. We then also have Independent Operative, which prevents them from getting Warlord traits, but gives them additional deployment options. Then lastly, we have Lightning Reflexes, giving them a 4+ symbol save, which is their only noteworthy save, given that they all have 6+ regular armor saves. But going back to the Khalida's specific abilities, we have Polymorphine, allowing her to potentially deploy even closer to enemy models than the shared ability would allow. We then also have Hit and Run, allowing her to fall back and still shoot and charge. Very useful, that one. And then last and arguably best of them all, Reign of Confusion, which affects stratagems your opponent plays during the first battle round. For each stratagem played, roll a d6 on a 4+, your opponent must spend an additional CP. If you're facing armies that spend a lot of CP during the first round, this can be pretty devastating. If you want to mess with your opponent's CP beyond that, there is also the 2 CP strat Supreme Deception, which can be used once per battle at the start of any battle round after the first, and basically puts Reign of Confusion in effect for that round. Lastly, we also have Acrobatic, allowing her to advance and charge, and she becomes -1 to hit. Overall, this makes her a very solid go-to assassin, the Reign of Confusion ability in particular. My second favorite is the Colexus Assassin, which is basically an anti-Psyker pick, and most of his unique toolset works better against Psykers. This makes him the ideal choice to swap in the moment you're facing a Psyker-heavy army, such as Grey Knights or Thousand Suns. His special abilities are Abomination, which reflect him being a blank according to lore, and it means that he can never be targeted or affected by psychic powers, and Psyker units that are within 18 inches of him must subtract 2 from Psychic and deny the Witch tests. Take that, Grey Knights. He also got Life Drain, which allows him to ignore armor saves in close combat, Ethereum, which puts an attacker to weapon and ballistic skill 6+, and Psychic Assassin, allowing him to target Psyker characters even if they are not the closest enemy unit. Another goodie is the 2 CP Soul Horror Stratagem, which makes enemy units within 3 inches of the assassin fight last. Excellent stratagem, even when not directly dealing with Psykers. But anyway, this one is amazing against Psykers, but too risky to just put in as the default unless you know for certain that you are dealing with a psychic heavy meta, therefore I would bring him in through the stratagem whenever needed. The other 2 assassins have become a bit more niche in my opinion. Third, we have the Eversor Assassin, which is basically a mad close combat killer that's particularly good at clearing hordes thanks to his killing rampage. I think the main issue with him is that he didn't age well in this 9th edition Codex creep, meaning he's putting out damage 1 attacks at strength 5. Against anything but chaff, this just isn't going to get him very far. Still, when facing horde-style armies with plenty of weak troops, this one can be a good option over the Khalidas. The 4th and last assassin, the Vindicare, suffers from similar issues. The combination of Lookout Sir, the cap to modifiers and generally tougher characters have made this classic sniper assassin far less reliable when it comes to bringing down its intended targets. Yes, you can roll hot on Deadshot and or Headshot, but it's a single shot and far too swingy to be considered reliable. What I do like about him though is the psychological warfare you can wage on your opponents. While more veteran players might not fall for it, I think that the average opponent is over careful around snipers and will most likely hide his characters more than necessary. While a similar effect can be achieved with eliminators in a Spectre's kill team, yet another reason why I love bringing them, doubling that one up with a Vindicare can lure them into tactical errors that are well worth the 100 points you pay for the assassin, even if he will end up killing less than that. Speaking of killing, all assassins have access to their priority threat neutralized stratagem, which costs 0 CP and can be used in any phase when the assassin kills an enemy character. You then gain 1 CP for a regular character, or 2 CP if that character was the warlord. With the assassins out of the way, how about bringing an Inquisitor instead? Here we have the choice between either going for unnamed Inquisitors with a multitude of customization options, or several named characters, which already have their loadout set in stone. First, a few words on the latter. The problem with named characters in 9th edition is, in my opinion, that they either happen to be very good, for instance Mormon Wall of the Sisters of Battle, Helbrecht of the Black Templars, or that Custodes guy, to name a few popular ones, and that essentially makes them auto-includes. Or they are just not competitive. Take our Captain Artemis, to give a less fortunate example. I'm sure there are some in-between picks for certain armies, but from a purely competitive perspective, it's largely one or the other. For the named Inquisitors, we have Inquisitor Cotese, Inquisitor Eisenhorn, Inquisitor Greyfax, Inquisitor Karamazov, Lord Inquisitor Kyriadraxis, Inquisitor Erasmus Cartovolnus, Inquisitor Solomon Locke, and Lord Inquisitor Hector Rex. No worries guys, I am going to spare you from going through all the datasheets, but instead will first focus on which one I consider the most competitive, and then make a case for picking one of the others anyway. If I had to make a pick, I would go for Lord Inquisitor Kyriadraxis, a Psyker, which I think is pretty decent for her 85 points. The Assault 2 damage to a ranged weapon is alright, though she primarily delivers in close combat, where the combination of a Power Fist and Weapon Skill 2+ make up for her low default strength of 3. She also has the Paralysis Grenades ability, which gives her access to fight last on the charge. Furthermore, she has a 5+ symbol save, as well as her pet dragon Shang, which allows her to do a targeted smite. In addition to this, she has access to several General Inquisitor abilities, which include being able to hijack a ride in a transport, getting rerolls depending on her ordo, and allowing nearby units to make use of her leadership value rather than their own. She also happens to be Ordo Xenos, which I think goes well with Deathwatch from a lore perspective. Speaking of which, when would I bring one of the other named characters along? As we have already established, by including them in the Deathwatch, you are already giving up the Army of Renown, our most competitive pick. But as I was already covering in a previous video about still playing non-Army of Renown lists, it is not always about being the most competitive. In my opinion, the Inquisition is one of the more interesting lore elements of Warhammer 40k, and there are a great many book series about various Inquisitors. If you happen to have read any of those stories, and you ended up liking one of the characters to the point where you want to bring them to life on the tabletop, what better opportunity to do so in a more casual or even narrative setting? If I have now picked your lore-related interest, allow me to give the following recommendations. Perhaps the most famous are the series about Inquisitor Eisenhorn and Inquisitor Ravenor, respectively, though I recommend starting with the former and then the latter. A more recent addition is Inquisitor Greyfax and her involvement with the Living Saint, Gilliman and his Indomitus Crusade. Here I would recommend the Our Martyred Lady audiobook, with Emma Gregory as Saint Celestine and Catherine Tate as Inquisitor Greyfax. It's worth it for these two alone, trust me on this. And if you want to read one of the most disturbing Warhammer 40k books ever written, I recommend the Inquisition War, an omnibus of 3 novels written by Ian Watson. It features both an Ordo Xenos Inquisitor and an assassin, and it's quite a read. If anyone happens to remember this one, let me know in the comments whether I am exaggerating or not. But anyway, to avoid getting sidetracked too much here, out of the named characters, either Kyriadraxis from a competitive perspective, or as an alternative, whichever Inquisitor you like best based on lore, the actual model, or maybe something fancy you found on their individual datasheet. No worries, Greyfax, you are still my personal favorite, just not for playing tabletop.
That is reassuringly blunt.
which leaves us with the Unnamed Inquisitors, where we have two options, either the plain Inquisitor datasheet or the Ordo Malleus Inquisitor in Terminator armor. Personally, I would go for the former, mainly because the latter is locked to Ordo Malleus. Why is that important? The reason is not tied to lore, though I think having an Ordo Xenos Inquisitor in a Deathwatch army is the most thematic, but rather access to an Ordo-locked Warlord trait, to which we will get in just a moment. Looking at his datasheet, we get unimpressive stats by Space Marine standards, but the default price tag of 60 points is alright. The Inquisitor can be a Psyker, and the default loadout can be changed to a variety of ranged and close combat weapons, depending on how many points you are willing to spend. The Inquisitor can then also hijack transports, get rerolls based on Ordo, and share his leadership value with nearby units, just as we have already seen before. He then also gets a 5+ invul save, and if he's not a Psyker, he also has the Iron Will ability, with which he has a chance to resist a psychic power. The true gem, however, comes through a unique stratagem, which is called Arbiter of the Emperor's Will, which allows the Inquisitor to select a Warlord trait and a relic. When selecting Ordo Xenos, we get access to the Ordo unique Warlord trait called Esoteric Lore. Whilst this Warlord is on the battlefield, roll 1d6 each time your opponent uses a stratagem. On a 5+, you gain 1 command point. Now, to wrap all of this up, for 60 points and 1 initial CP investment, you can park the Inquisitor somewhere in the back and just have him CP farm. I think that this is currently one of the better ways to use them competitively. That they also happen to be Ordo Xenos is a thematic convenience for Deathwatch. Overall, while Deathwatch is taking a competitive dent by including an agent of the Imperium, namely because it restricts us from using the Army of Renown, I think either an Assassin or an Inquisitor can be a decent addition to a non-Army of Renown list. For Assassins, I would take the Calidas as the default and then swap her out for another one by using the 2 CP stratagem, depending on matchup. If I wanted to go for an Inquisitor, I would take a cheap unnamed one for CP farming, or Kyria Draxus to go alongside a close combat kill team. She has a decent range of abilities and access to a fight last on the charge. The more competitive picks aside, if you happen to like one specific Inquisitor based on the lore, by all means go for it in more casual or narrative play. To wrap things up, over the course of the video, we have taken a closer look at both Assassins and Inquisitors and how to include them into a Deathwatch army. While they cannot be combined with the Army of Renown, a single agent of the Imperium can be included in a regular list without breaking any special rules or taking up a battlefield role slot. For the Assassins, we have the shapeshifting Calidas, the anti-psyker Colexus, the mad Eversor, and the classic sniper Vindicare. Fun fact, there is no datasheet for the Vanus Assassin, which I think is at least as important as the other temples. Personally, the Calidas is my overall go-to, with the option to swap her out for one of the others, though it usually ends up being the Colexus against Grey Knights of Thousand Suns, and I rarely use the other two. For Inquisitors, while there are a lot of named datasheets, for me personally, only Kyria Draxus is a competitive enough entry, a targeted smite, decent and close combat, access to fight last on the charge. It makes for a very potent combo. Staying on the competitive side, I think an unnamed Ordo Xenos Inquisitor with the Esoteric Lore Warlord trait is a great way to CP farm for a minimalistic investment of 60 points plus 1 CP. But having said all that, I don't want to dismiss the other named Inquisitors, especially the ones that are rooted deeply into the lore, and if you happen to have a personal favorite, I think it is well worth considering for more casual or narrative play. All in all, it is easy to overlook the agents of the Imperium at the moment, because they cannot be part of the Army of Renown, but I think they are still fun models to bring along in any other list. So that's it for including Assassins and Inquisitors in the Deathwatch. Are you guys running any of these yourself? Or are you planning to bring them back into your lists? Any good combos I missed? Or named Inquisitor datasheets I have done some injustice to? Greyfax doesn't count.
I shall be the judge of that.
Let me know in the comments. Finally, I would also like to mention that there is a SwissHammer Facebook page where I will be posting links to my videos as well as articles I find of interest. I do read a lot about the hobby, but not all of it will always end up as its own video. I look forward to seeing you there as well. I do also have a Patreon page. If you like my content, any additional support is greatly appreciated as it helps me invest into future videos. As always, thank you very much for watching, guys. Your continued support is greatly appreciated. I hope you have been enjoying this video. Give me a thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks again and see you next time.